Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 17, 2024. I want to thank Rob Grantson and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure today to be here with Jerry Harp. Where are you calling in from, Jerry?
Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. How cool is that? The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Well, the best thing for a human being is love,
Love.
relationship, connection.
That's the answer I get the most and I most agree with. So, what is your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a favorite form, but I've got the form that I specialize in, which I love, which is poetry.
Yeah. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think it makes us more human.
That is good. Makes us more human. um, is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Well, I think it's both. That Let me talk a little bit about that innate and invented distinction. And it's
Yeah.
also referred to as natural and artificial.
Yeah.
And one of my mentors way back in the day, Father Walter Ong, was fond of saying it's natural for humans to be artificial.
Oh, that is good.
That is, we make things. In evolutionary history, as soon as we're not spending every ounce, every calorie of energy just surviving, we create things. We start messing around. We make paintings in caves. And then we start inventing things that help us in our pursuit of survival, like weapons
Yeah.
and so forth. And then we go on to make things like symphonies, bridges, and airplanes and laws.
It's endless, man. That was good because, yeah, McLuhan says technology is our most human thing. And he means anything we invent, which you just inventoried there,
Yeah, yeah,
is our most human thing. But,
I agree. Yeah,
most people are like that. They don't quite get it. But it was interesting how Ong said that. And you didn't go nature nurture. You went natural and artificial.
yeah, yeah.
And Ong was huge influence on McLuhan, and they exchanged a lot. So,
Yeah,
do
even though, by the way, McLuhan was Ong's teacher.
oh really,
Yeah,
McLuhan?
McLuhan was at St. Louis University, where Father Ong did his master's degree in English. And
Oh,
McLuhan directed his master's thesis on the sprung rhythm of Jared Manley Hopkins.
oh my God. Well, I'm sure we'll get more into that. Let's just go with the script and we'll see where it goes. I'm for anecdotes, stories, tangents, anything. So,
Well, that's kind of how I just read my course evaluations, and apparently that's how my mind works too. That's
we're
what my
like,
students talk about.
do thoughts create emotions?
Well, they're certainly deeply connected. That's another binary that I think needs to be deconstructed. I mean, I think our emotions and our thoughts, our ideas are so terribly intertwined, not terribly, but beautifully intertwined, that I don't think it's very meaningful to somehow disentangle them. Although
Right.
we do that so we can talk about them. I'll say that I've got an anecdote about this. Long time ago, I had a course release where I teach at Lewis and Clark College to try to encourage student professor interaction. And one of the things I did once a week, I would have an interview with a faculty member or staff member in front of students. I would just ask the first couple of questions, then open it up to the students. Then I'd ask follow-up questions and continuity questions, that kind of thing. And so, of course, I had professors in the sciences, including the mathematical sciences. And inevitably, it always came up that the chemists, biologists, physicists, mathematicians were in their fields for aesthetic as much as intellectual reasons. They found their fields of pursuit to be beautiful. Um, and they were very forthright about it. I just bring it up, and generally there was this response of great enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Um, because it's something, I mean, my impression, I don't know for sure, my impression is that it's something they live with, but it's not always something they have an opportunity to talk about. So they were eager to talk about it. And I think
Yeah.
that's an example of the intertwining of thought and emotion.
Yeah. It's like this. We invented head and heart, feeling and thinking. We're going to get into this a little more in these opening questions. Just because we invented the words doesn't mean you can separate them.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
it's really me and you versus the wordings on the questions,
Hmm.
because I'm not even after did you answer the question. They're just prompts for
Yeah,
us to do that. So that was a really good example already. You went natural, artificial, then aesthetic and intellectual. That's really beautiful. So fill in the blank, Jerry. I
okay.
don't I don't know what I think until I
Write it down.
really, because that's exactly what Joan Didion says. I don't know what I think until I write it. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And I'm finding 80% of people say, I don't know what I think until I do it or experience it. But
Yeah.
it does vary a lot. Can humans think without language?
Yeah, that's a deep question. Um, I'm going to say no, but what I mean by that is not what it might seem. Um, because there's a school of thought that says, well, unless I can say something, I don't know it. And there's something to that. I mean, if I can say something, I know it in a more overt way, a more articulated way, because I've articulated it. But there are such things as hunches, a
Yes.
feel for things. Something Father Ong used to talk about. He got this from Michael Polanyi, the great mid 20th century, I think Hungarian scientist and philosopher, the idea of tacit knowledge. I talk with my students about this a lot because I think it's important for us to have in our repertoire of thinking. Um, Two of the examples I think of um, that Polanyi gives, there he gave the example of a medical school professor who showed a film to his students on the first day of their class of a person having a kind of seizure. And I don't remember the exact terminology. I should look it up, but I'll just say seizure type A and type B. And after it's over, the professor said, that person was having seizure type A. By the time you finish your course of study, you will be able to distinguish between type A and type B, but you won't be able to explain how you're doing it. It will just be there.
Yeah.
And it comes from this, long habit of study, but it somehow exceeds what one's able to say. Another example Polanyi gives is facial recognition.
Yeah.
We can distinguish from among thousands of different faces, uh, but we only have a very rudimentary vocabulary to be able to talk about how we're doing that.
Right. Let me go back. What's tacit mean? What's another word for that?
Oh
Tacit
yeah,
mean
unspoken.
unspoken. Yeah, unspoken. A lot of what you said we're going to get deep into, because I always love to quote Lily Tomlin. She says, reality's just a collective hunch.
Yeah,
I love that word hunch, because really that's what I'm after from studying McLuhan. I'm not after concept, I'm after percept,
yeah,
intuition, instinct, hunch, your gut, so that I actually interviewed this great poet the other day, and she says, well, there's two types of perception, and really there's probably a third type that we don't know. We don't have a word for it.
yeah,
And that's what I think you're going,
mhm,
you're leaning towards that.
yeah. Oh
There
yeah.
Some of these words work pretty good, hunch.
Mhm.
Okay, well, Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Mhm.
Jerry, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, sometimes I just sit in silence, take it
Yeah.
in, take it
Yeah.
in. Every morning I start with meditation, and it's just basic mindfulness meditation.
Yeah.
Like my mentor Father Ong, I'm a person of faith, so for me it's a kind of meditative prayer, but it's just about sitting and silently being in the presence of the divine as
Yeah.
much as possible,
Good.
without images, without concepts, without language.
It's good. Very good. And so you already went into this. I'm going to ask it anyways, and you can go wherever you want. Like,
Mhm.
what do you think most people say? Are we more thinking beings or more feeling
Oh,
beings?
we're more feeling beings. We
Really?
are absolutely more feeling beings.
Yeah.
I mean, I think rationality is important, and some people are able to disentangle themselves from their biases. And biases are, by the way, I don't think. Well, it depends on the bias. I was going to say biases are not necessarily bad things. I mean, some biases obviously are.
Yeah.
Biases about race and gender and sexual orientation. Those are toxic. A lot of those biases, but if my memory serves me, bias comes from lawn bowling, British sport of lawn bowling, and it's sort of the
Oh,
spin.
really? I'm going to look this up. I
Yeah, well,
love it.
I need to double check to make sure I'm
But
right
it's
about
all
this.
right. See, again, that's what I like about these dialogues. I don't want people to go shoot onto Google and find out because etymology online is my favorite.
Mhm.
Afterwards, I'll look it up. But again, it's us talking about our hunch and our memory and what we could, and then we might have a better revelation or epiphany on our guesses.
Right? Yeah, yeah.
So go ahead. Bias comes from lawn
Well, I'm
bowling.
going, and it has to do with the spin that's put it. So it's what makes the bowl work well, the
Yeah,
bias that it has on it.
yeah,
So I mean that means in some sense my biases are what allow my mind to work.
yeah.
Because I've got a particular slant on something, that means I can delve into a subject matter or a poem in a way that may not be available otherwise. Now, of course, as I say, some biases are toxic and we have to work against them. So it's not a sort of clean idea, but it's something to work with.
It's like Jacques Rouel taught McLuhan propaganda is just culture in action. And my friend goes, no, it's not. It's worse than it's bad. It's like, no, I mean, I give out paper flyers. I go, can I
Yeah.
give you some propaganda? And I go, whatever you do, don't read it. And they go, do you have anything I could read? So I mean, anyways, here's two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, not that we really know what the soul is. It's somehow. I mean, I do believe in the soul. I don't believe in a kind of clear body soul distinction as you get in Platonism or Cartesianism, but something that emerges out of our evolutionary process. But yeah, I think so.
Good.
And
Second Turing question is, can machines think?
I really don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think they have an unconscious.
Yeah.
And I think to do thinking in any meaningful way, um, our consciousness has to emerge out of out of a rich unconscious.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
That's a well. I mean, okay. If I'm just going to pick one, I'll say meaning. But
Yeah.
that's another binary I can't really separate, because
Yeah.
I think I'm happiest when I feel that I'm doing something meaningful.
But I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he tends to say, and I'm curious your reaction, he tends to say happiness doesn't necessarily last, meaning does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, but if I'm living a lastingly meaningful life, there has to be some level of happiness about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Well, if I had to use one of those terms, I'd say creating.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm not a reductionist. I don't think consciousness simply
Yeah.
can be explained in terms of the neurological processes of the brain, though mind doesn't work without those neurological processes.
Yeah. Again, it's interesting because I've debated, because that's why I throw the word more in. I don't want people to say it does detect or it does create. And then a woman said to me once, the word more doesn't function in your question. And again, I debated whether, and this again, it's me and you working with the noun and the verb and the question.
Mhm.
And I'm all for substituting other words or changing it. Because I could say, does the human detect or create consciousness? Does the body? Does the soul? But somehow I found the question, does the brain? So I kind of stuck with that. Okay, a couple more binaries. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, I'm just going to say speed of thought. That's just my intuition. That's my gut intuition.
Yeah, well, there's no right or wrong answers, but that one you got right, Jerry.
Okay.
Okay, Audre Lorde. Now we're going to get into poetry a lot, but this is early on. Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded to her and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
There was a scholar named Paul Connolly who I think he was a sort of a McLuhanite, but
How do you spell the last name?
if I remember correctly, it's Connelly.
Okay.
And he said that you don't persuade people just by coming up with new arguments. You persuade people by coming up with a new way of speaking,
Yeah.
a new style of language. And that's the tool I would recommend. Hard to do. Hard to do that. That's why so many of us poets sound like each other.
Wow, that is a great observation. We sound like each other.
We do. We do.
Yeah, no, it is true.
It's
It's
a,
like,
it's a lot of work to differentiate, to individuate one's voice.
yeah, that's like when I live 5 blocks down from one of the oldest poetry centers in the world, Beyond Baroque, and I put on events there for 20 years, and it's amazing. And when slam poetry came in, they all went, "Oh, that's you're supposed to stand in front of a podium and read it. You're not supposed to go woo ah, ah," and memorize it." It's like, dude, we'll take anything if you're gonna hike up poetry a little. And I would see kids go into clubs and go, are you people into spoken word?
Mhm, mhm.
It's like, yeah. Well, we've been using it forever.
I was the faculty advisor to our slam poetry club for a while.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. Okay, so what new toy do you suggest?
Oh, new toy. Well, I always like to get new ink pens.
Oh, I love it. I always show my pen during these Zooms. New ink pens, very
I
good.
get these cheap pens, and I always carry 3
Oh, you
when
got
I
it.
leave. Now, and so when a student or anybody else needs a pen, I can just give it to them, and it's cheap, so it doesn't matter. I just say,
Yeah,
just keep it.
yeah. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
That a certain former president will be president again.
Yeah.
I was at a conference in Toronto. Well, actually, it was yeah, it was a media college conference, 2016 during the election, and I went to Saturday night mass, big church there, and during the prayers of the faithful, the person reading the prayers included for our neighbors to the south that they will exercise wisdom in their upcoming presidential election. And as I was leaving the church, the priest said, "So are you visiting?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Are you from the States?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, I saw you laugh during the prayers of the faithful."
McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions. So we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Jerry, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think the new is scary.
Yeah.
And so it's I mean, this is something that Father Ong talked about all the time. When we get a new, yeah, and technologies of language, I think we're especially sensitive to because we're such language using, meaning making creatures. So new language technology comes along, and we're scared of it. And he goes back to Phaedrus, the Plato's dialogue where the character of Socrates talks about why writing, which was at the time a relatively new technology of language, is pernicious.
Yeah.
And the movies and television were going to be our ruin, and so now we hear the same thing about the internet. Um,
Yeah. Chat box, everything, everything news. So, do artists have moral obligation?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember there's an interview. Another one of my mentors is a poet named Donald Justice. I don't know how many people read Donald Justice anymore. Very fine poet. There's an interview where the interviewer asks him, what does a person need to be a poet? And of course, he talks about language skill, that kind of thing. But he also says a conscience.
Wow.
And it just, he doesn't make a big deal out of it. It's just, he just slips that in. It's just, well, of course,
Yeah.
you need a conscience. I think we have an obligation to the language, and we have an obligation to be real in our poems. I often think of Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where Kurtz, who is not a paragon of virtue, nevertheless says something that I often think about. He says, "Nothing offends me more than the stench of a lie."
Wow.
Um, or there's and that may not be a direct quote, but it's
No.
close to that. And there's the saying, the statement attributed to Hemingway that a writer should write what they feel, not what they think they're supposed to feel.
Nice. What they feel, what's supposed to. Yeah. Well, it's a hard one because it's separate the art from the artist. When I ask about moral obligation,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm.
I mean, I had a guy once say, I have to be careful when I say McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the intent of a race, or from Pound. And if they literally say, I wouldn't believe anything Pound says. They just discount him, like, de-escalating him, and it's like, can you separate the art from the artist? So
Pound was really, I think he was a genius,
yeah,
really smart, and he was also, I think, really crazy.
crazy, yeah,
Yeah. Um, and toxic. I mean, he was pro
yeah,
Mussolini. What can you say?
yeah. Yeah, and I'm in the film world, and you know who invented film festivals? Mussolini. It's like scary, and people are like, "Oh my god!" And Stalin, those guys love. Okay, so are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I think well, I'll tell you what, there's a very personal reason for that. I am more afraid of old ideas,
Yeah,
although I have great respect for old ideas.
yeah,
I love to read ancient philosophy. I just finished reading a biography of Plato.
yeah.
Um, but when I was in college, I was very influenced by um, an Aristotelian professor. I went to a seminary. It was a very interesting seminary run by Benedictine monks, and we were taught ancient metaphysics, but we were also taught deconstruction. Uh,
Wow,
One of our professors had studied under J. Hillis Miller, and he was lecturing about deconstruction from our freshman year on.
wow.
And but I really, and I was an English major, and I loved deconstruction, but I really came under the thrall of that professor, and I think I took it in a way that he didn't even intend. It sort of became. I mean, I wanted just to believe. Here's the truth, and it got tied into a whole narrative about the decline of Western culture and civilization. And of course, as soon as I buy into that, given that I know it and I'm on Aristotle's side or Plato's side or whatever, then I'm one of the good guys. I don't even have to do anything. And it's like conspiracy theory. It's very seductive because you don't have to do much of anything and you're on the side of the good. And I
Yeah,
think it was serving my psychological needs. It was actually people like Father Ong very much, who helped get me out of that. But it's very toxic.
yep,
Um, Very toxic. So, it's for very personal reasons. The seduction of old ideas
yeah.
that I can fear them. And
Well,
really, it's what I'm talking about is fearing the part of my psyche that wants to have all the answers and to cease searching.
yeah. But again, Jerry, that is what most people say. When I say, "Are you?" I mean, sometimes they go, "I'm not afraid of ideas," but I'm open for anything. But when
Mhm.
I find the pattern, 80% of say I'm more afraid of old ideas. You know.
Yeah,
So, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
yeah. Given the location, I was 2 years old. And my brother was 14, my older brother, who's dead now, but we talked about this. So I had my memory corroborated by talking with him about it. Um, it would have been 1963. I'm riding on my brother's handlebars. So I'm 2, he's 14. And so 1963, we're not messing with like a safety seat or a helmet or anything. I'm just hanging on to my brother's handlebars and we're going down the street. And a police officer comes and pulls us over. Says my brother can't do that. It's too dangerous. Um, Police officer drives away, and this is so much my brother. He says, "We'll wait until the cop's out of sight, then you can get back on." And this is so much me, cautious. And so, well, what if he catches us? And my brother says, well, if he catches us, he'll take us to the police station, and they'll put us in these chairs and turn on the juice.
And what did you say?
I didn't say anything, but remember, I'm 2, so I don't know what electricity is or that juice is a figure of speech for electricity. I pictured wooden chairs hooked up to those bubbly juice machines like you'd see in the drugstore. And because of the way my brother said it, I could tell it wasn't good. So to this day, those bubbly juice machines kind of give me the creeps.
That is so articulate. I really vision that. Thank you. You're a wordsmith, Jerry. I appreciate it. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Blessing.
Yeah.
It's a blessing. Although a lot of memories are painful. I have plenty of painful memories. My father, God love him, was an alcoholic. Um, he was also a man, I think, of great courage and sensitivity and intelligence. But there were a lot of struggles in that. I come from a small town in southern Indiana, right on the river. And, I grew up in the 60s and, a lot of racism, misogyny, homophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and a lot of it, I was part of. I didn't know better, and those are not pleasant memories.
yeah. And you have ESP because the next question is, tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was the impact?
Oh, you mean when I was younger?
Well, yeah, you put in the context you want. It doesn't have to be younger, but it's someone within your family and outside who had an impact on you. And what was that impact?
I will. I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about when I was younger,
Yeah.
um, partly because it involves something I wanted to bring up anyway.
Yeah.
But I've already talked about one. My brother.
Yeah.
My brother had a massive stroke at age 71. This was a little over 4 years ago, and he too was alcoholic and could be very difficult. I hadn't talked to him for a few years, which I regret. And I didn't even know that he had stopped drinking
Wow.
because he fell in love with these grandkids of his and was taking care of them during the day when their parents worked. And that's just what he had to do to be able to spend time with him. He was an utterly transformed human being. And I got this from his ex-wife
Wow.
who had divorced him. But the first thing she said, I mean, his dead body was still in the bed in hospice. She walked in and said, Jerry, you would have been so proud of your brother these last few years.
Oh my God.
I
What a
wish, I wish that I had been in touch with him. At any rate, when I walked in, he was lying in the bed. This was in the hospital before he went to hospice. I walked in, my sister was there, a couple of his kids were there, and oh no, and I just said, there's nothing I'm doing right now. And I was thinking in terms of teaching college, writing poetry, writing articles, all those kinds of things. I said, there's nothing I would be doing right now that I'm doing without his influence.
wow. And he heard that.
I hope he did. I
Yeah.
hope he did. He was not able to speak at this point, but I hope he did. I'd told him things to that effect earlier. I wish I'd said them more often.
Yeah.
But no, he took me under his wing from the time I was a baby.
Yeah.
And he exposed me to music.
Yeah.
When he was around that age that he was riding me around on his bike, maybe a little bit earlier in that, somehow this kid in southern Indiana discovered pretty much on his own um, J.D. Salinger, Rudolph Nureyev, Oscar Wilde, and the Rolling Stones. You put
Wow.
those four things together and it creates a kind of sensibility that he passed on to me. So it's not just that he gave me knowledge, he gave me a sensibility. He also gave me a very dark sense of humor.
Yeah. Wait, it was J.D. Salinger, Oscar Wilde.
Rudolph Nureyev.
Oh, Nuri. Yeah. Boy, you covered it all. That was
Covered it
beautiful.
all.
But the
Covered it all.
humor thing is good. We're going to get into humor and truth. Okay, now outside your immediate family.
It's somebody you interviewed.
Who?
When I was, I've sort of given a portrait of my home, and it's not that the town had nothing going on in it, but there was not a lot of artistic pursuit in my hometown. But my high school girlfriend, girl I did in high school, her mom was a potter, and she taught pottery at the university about 15 miles away. They lived in an apartment just down the street. My girlfriend, her sister, and her mom. And there was this train of artists who were constantly coming through, who I got to meet and interact with, sometimes eat meals with. And there's only one that I really remember vividly, and whose name I remember, and that's Dylan Buston.
Oh my God.
So I met him when I was 17. There's no reason whatsoever why he would remember me, but I remember him. I remember him being so smart and funny. And, he came to our high school and did a musical performance for us. We all went into the auditorium, had a convocation. Dylan Buston. So I've always remembered him. And just, here's a guy who was traveling around doing his art.
Yeah.
And devoted to his art, and it was his life's pursuit.
So you mean you really haven't encountered him but that one time?
Right.
Oh my God.
But he made this powerful impression.
Oh.
And then I saw his name, and because before we did when you asked me to do this interview, I got onto the website because I wanted to hear, how do these interviews go? And I saw his name, and I kind of recognized him, his voice, and from what he's from a small town in India. I mean, it took me about 10 minutes to realize, this is definitely him.
Definitely him. Yeah, Dylan's a mentor to me. I mean, we've gone to the music festival in Maine for 25 years. And a lot of times it was driving in Dylan's car from Boston up to Maine for 5 hours, and me just hounding him with every question in the world. And then I learned he comes from semiotics, and he knows everything about Emerson and everything about Thoreau and everything about folk music and everything about everything. He's an immensely important person in my life. Yeah. I can't wait.
Just from that one encounter, he's an important person in my life.
It's amazing. I cannot wait to tell him. Tune in to minute 36, Dylan. Yeah. In fact, he's the one who got us my wife and I got married in Paoli.
Oh, really? Paoli, Indiana, where they have the skiing.
Paoli, Indiana. Amazing. Yeah.
That's where you were married.
Because Andy Mahler, a distant relative of Gustav Mahler, has a farm there. And we had a traditional hippie wedding on a farm, and Dylan was a big part of it because we said, we're traveling across America. We want to stop and fix a dinner for cool people, and then they put us up for the night, and we'll fix them a gourmet meal and trade. And any back porch kind of people. And he goes, yeah, Andy Mahler and Paoli. And we sat there and did it. And then we said, hey, a year later, can we get married here? It's like, yeah. Dylan was there. Yeah. Okay. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Yeah, Catholic.
And so do you pray?
Yes, every day. I meditate in the morning. I say the Angelus. I say at least one part of the Divine Office, usually night prayer. It's a short part of the breviary. Do that at night.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Come in.
Yeah, beautiful. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Powerful question. I don't necessarily believe in any kind of devil. I mean, frankly, I don't know what's out there. I mean, I do believe in God. I'm not sure I believe in the devil. The devil may be an important metaphor. and again, I can't really say what's out there. I think the universe is freakish.
Yeah.
Um, but I think in some sense, evil uses people. I mean, there are people who are born psychopaths and so forth, but a lot of that seems to come from nurture. I tell you, psychopathy is something that I read about every 10 years or so. I'll start reading about it and then I stop because I start getting afraid that I'm a psychopath. So I stop.
That's I think you're pretty sane.
Yeah.
And you're really articulate, and I'm learning a lot. This is really emotional for me, Jerry. I appreciate this a lot because the hidden question really is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Yeah.
Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. A basic question: how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think I think that's right. I think that's right. And that in a sense kind of goes back to Paul Connolly's idea that if I acknowledge my enemy, and then where my mind immediately goes when you say acknowledge my enemy, I start arguing with them on their terms,
Yeah.
and then I've already lost. I need to speak in a new way. Um, I think the way to deal with an enemy is with, and this is a sort of mindfulness term, but centered energy. So that
Center
so that
energy.
it's not that my focus is out there on them, and so that again they're able to set the terms of discourse. It's in here.
Yeah.
It's inside me. And I think that, I mean, we haven't really talked about, well, what's that enemy doing? Are they coming at me
Yeah.
physically? I think even then, I mean, I have to be attuned to them, but I have to keep my energy in here and not let sort of my fear take over, because then
Yeah.
they're setting the terms. Not that I'm a fighter. I mean, I've never been in a real fight. I was in schoolyard fights in grade school, but
Like the Irish say, is this a private fight or can anyone join in? But you evoked early on there saying that you evoked Sam Goldman, that as for my critics, don't even ignore them. You
that's
know, but
great. Yeah, yeah.
I'm curious, being a poet, Walt Whitman says, I no doubt deserve my enemies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I don't know about that.
I don't know. I think yeah, I don't know. I was going to say something with confidence, but my confidence is waning with every breath. So I don't know if I'm going to say anything.
You're really grounded and down to earth. I appreciate it. Because the other one I want to mention is American Indians, indigenous natives say, your enemy's your best teacher.
Yeah, yeah,
But it's not like, oh, I got to seek it out, because this is sort of the follow-up, Jerry, is Nassim Taleb said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is.
yeah.
And then my friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad, they want control.
Mhm.
Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So there are a lot of prompts. You can go wherever you want, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
No, I don't think so. I don't
Yeah.
think so. Um, there's an emerging movement that I'm just a marginal part of that really wants to reform prisons.
Yeah.
Um, make them not institutions of punishment, but of second chances,
Yeah.
reform. And
Yeah.
there's danger in that. I mean, that's what the novel Clockwork Orange is about.
Yeah.
If I've decided, well, I'm not going to punish, but I'm going to reform, well, reform on whose terms?
Yeah.
Um, but it seems to me that there's got to be a way we can do it that is not problematic or not deeply problematic in a way that our punitive system is problematic now.
Yeah.
I have a colleague, Rachel Hillier, in the history department. She just wrote a book called "A Wall Is Just a Wall," about how the prison system hasn't always functioned this way in the United States. Just go earlier in the 20th century. It was much more permeable. People in prisons would go out and be part of,
Yeah.
like musical performances and this kind of thing. And she years ago started teaching these inside out courses. That is, we have half Lewis and Clark students and half incarcerated students. We take the Lewis and Clark students to the prison, and we have a class. So she's done that for 10 or 12 years, and
Oh,
I'm scheduled to do it in the fall. I'm finally getting around to signing on to do it. She's got, I think, 4 or 5 of us involved now, and we're trying to grow that program. And I think that kind of thing works better than
yeah.
just a vision of punishment.
Yep. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Faulkner says years later, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a habit that goes back to the ancient world, doesn't it? Think of the great plays of Sophocles and so forth, Aristophanes. Yeah, Father Ong used to talk about there's a real psychological need to read fiction, experience fiction. And I think it has to do with inhabiting another viewpoint, inhabiting a another sensibility, a way of experiencing the world. I can do that to an extent with people I know, but the fiction gives me a kind of distance from it so that it's unthreatening. I can do it at my own pace. Um, I think it makes it available in a way that's not available, if I'm just talking to another person.
Yeah.
Well, I'll go another step. Yeah. For reasons I could never identify, when I was in college, I fell in love with the idea of metafiction.
Yeah.
That is fiction that breaks the boundaries of fiction. And I'm just a sucker for it. Anywhere I encounter it, even if it's a Looney Tunes cartoon, I just think it's the greatest. There's a Looney Tunes cartoon where um, it's drawn into the cartoon that a hand with a pencil
Oh, yeah.
erases Bugs Bunny's ears and that kind
Oh,
of thing.
yeah.
Just love it. And it only recently occurred to me why I love that so much. And I'm going to put it in context of something kind of personal that I don't mind talking about, but if this sounds like too much, let me know. But
Please.
I've always dealt with depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. I've had 4 major breakdowns in my life. The last one was a few years ago, and it was the worst. By far, it was the worst. But finally, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So, by the way, as a side note, I'm an utter cliche, a poet with bipolar, and I'll never be able to do it as well as Robert Lowell, who was amazing at being a bipolar poet.
Yeah.
But it takes a while to get out of that space of the break. And I think this one was all intertwined with my divorce. I was married for 20 years. We got divorced. I think it was a good thing, but I was grieving that, first fearing it and then grieving it, and then having this breakdown. And see, reality gets distorted in these breakdowns. And where I go is kind of what I was talking about earlier. When I was, had this kind of narrative, in college and just after, of the decline of Western civilization, which has always been linked with, when I experienced that, it's been linked with conservative Catholicism. So I made this decision that I was going to be, and this was just a few years ago, conservative Catholic, adhere to the church's teaching. Although in my heart of hearts, I never did, and I never could. I mean, I believe in women priests, LGBTQ plus marriage. And as I said, and I start talking about all the different things that I believe, and it goes beyond that. Sometimes friends of mine will say, if you believe that, you're not really Catholic. Well, I go to mass, I identify as Catholic. And the other thing that I often point out is I'm not an anomaly.
Yeah.
A lot of the Catholics, and including Catholic priests I hang with, have very similar beliefs.
Yeah.
The wider church is capacious. At any rate, that was kind of part of my narrative of this last breakdown, that I felt like, well, I had to adhere strictly to the church's teaching, though I couldn't do it finally. And it wasn't going to happen. It was never going to happen. But even when I was trying to do it, I couldn't do it. But the idea of metafiction, part of my healing has been the ability to observe myself in my own narrative. The narrative that I create for myself, the narrative that I have to be this or that conservative Catholic, the narrative that, if I'm not a certain kind of poet, I'm a failure. Whatever the narrative is, I can view that from a distance and realize, well, that's not me. That's just this set of expectations I've bought into. This is, a certain story I've told myself about myself, but it's not me. And even, I've gotten to the point where I can do that with feelings. So I'll start feeling upset or anxious and can just sort of step back and say, well, there is this anxious feeling. Just start there. I don't know that I have anything to be anxious about. I wonder what that's connected to. And often I'll realize, oh yeah, it's this thing that happened 40 years ago that somehow is weighing on me or whatever. I think that the reading of literature inculcates the ability to have this kind of meta consciousness, even if it's not, metafiction or, meta theatrical work. It allows us to understand how narratives function.
Yeah.
And how our own narratives function. Now, that's very general. I mean, I think the individual work, poetries are carriers of meaning. We can have a philosophical approach or just an aesthetic response to a poem, and that's perfectly legitimate too. So that's the kind of general answer, though, that it inculcates this ability to see our lives as narratives and have some distance from those narratives so that I'm not simply bounded by them.
Yeah. It's really deep there. You got so much. It just reminded me of my study of James Joyce and Finnegan's Wake. It reminded me of my whole delve into Frank Zappa and Marcel Duchamp and all these people. I mean, that goes everywhere.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
you just described. And, going into creative writing, is it, I'm not quite there yet, but the one main thing is does the creative writing teacher go, okay, write what you know, and the other one goes, no, write what your imagination can dream up. Like go for it. But the one thing about meta I like and I'm curious, metafiction is that what similar to Menippean satire?
Oh,
Because what I understand Menippean satire as,
mhm.
not an expert on it, is when you're like a comic makes fun of somebody, but if the comic uses the means of making fun of someone as in the process, it's so wrapped up that that's what media Menippean satire is it's
Mhm.
so wrapped up in that you can't separate it. So,
Yeah.
Rabelais, Lewis Carroll, McLuhan and all his stuff, and Joyce, and it's like Woody Allen turning to the camera and says, "Well, wouldn't it be great if life was like that?" It's like, hey, you're not supposed to talk to us like that. You're supposed to remain in, it's like engaging us in, I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's the meta move. That moment from Annie Hall when they're standing in the movie line
Yeah,
and he addresses the camera directly and brings out
yeah,
Marshall McLuhan. That's a supremely meta moment.
yeah, yeah. And the key of that is he has Marshall. I mean, it's not a key; it's an observation. He has Marshall say one of his best lines as a statement, not as a question.
You
Marshall's
have
all,
misunderstood my whole fallacy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The way Marshall said it his whole career was, "Is my whole fallacy wrong?"
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
a question. Woody Allen said, You mean my whole fallacy's wrong as a statement?" And I always go, well, he still exposed McLuhan to the world only halfway, but another McLuhan maxim applies. A half a truth is still a lot of a truth.
that's an awful lot of truth. Yeah.
I love that metafiction. So, Jerry, walk us through. You have this older brother. I don't know. Is your sister older or younger?
She's older. My brother was 12 years older, and my sister she's still alive, 11 years older.
Yeah. And then you have your mom and your dad. And where is your tipping point to say, well, being a poet is my calling?
Yeah.
Being an educator is my calling. What did you study in high school, in college, and where are you
Yeah.
finding that? Yeah.
I was an indifferent high school student. Years later, I talked to one of my former high school teachers who expressed to me how frustrating it was to have me as a student because clearly I was reading and writing all the time, just not what I was assigned. I would read just enough of what was assigned to be able to talk about it a little bit. So I was an indifferent high school student in terms of doing school, but I would go sit by the river. And I don't know where I got this idea, but I had this idea. This is what poets do. I would sit by the river on the rocks and read poems and write poems, and I would go down and inscribe poems in the sand for the river to wash away. I was so romantic a young man. I was probably a danger to myself and others, and probably should have been institutionalized.
But wait a
But
minute, where are you learning that? Yeah, you see
don't
Huck
know.
Finn. I mean, where? But I mean, you must have learned that people write poems by going to the library and find, or did the teacher go read this poem and then that was your epiphany? I can be this. How did you find out what it meant to be a poet?
Yeah, yeah. Um, in school, in school.
By what they assigned you?
Yeah. So I was reading some of what I was assigned.
Yeah.
Um, a few years ago, I was asked to write an essay for an anthology about works of art that have had a lasting influence on us. And I wrote about William Cullen Bryant's Thanatopsis, Meditation on Death. Um, we encountered that in that teacher's class, the teacher I was just referring to. We read that poem in his class, and it's the ending that's really so moving, where he gives these two very comforting visions of death. One is as a constant caravan of people going into the earth. So it's this communal activity. And the other is lying down on a couch and tossing a drapery, which was, as my teacher explained, it was a, a kind of blanket, ornamental blanket that would be kept on the couch that you could toss over you if you wanted to take a little nap. You know, throw my drapery over me and lie down to pleasant dreams. Um, that's what I wrote about. That is a poem that has stayed with me for decades. And see, when I was in 8th grade, I was 13. My father died. And it was a few years later that I read that poem. I had no idea that that poem appealed to me as a way of addressing my father's death. But in retrospect, it just seems like, obviously, of course, that's
Yeah.
what was happening.
You learned how poets speak to people. You learned it.
Yeah.
So a screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a poem?
Well, that's interesting. Since I've recovered from that last breakdown, I've been writing poems as never before. They just keep coming, and often I find that the best ones just start with a line. I don't know where they're going. Um, I guess you could say there. Well, there's got to be some kind of intentionality in there, but often I couldn't say, "Oh, here's what I meant by this poem." And, yeah, a meaning emerges, but I often feel like I'm following that meaning, allowing it to emerge. That's what it feels like. I mean, obviously, it's coming out of me, but a lot of it is the work of the unconscious mind. Um, so, in some ways, intention works for me in the sense that I need to get out of my own way.
Yeah, that's amazing because Lakoff says, neuroscientist says, yeah, we're operating 80% sub or unconscious. I was like, for the hour we've been together, I feel we've both been very conscious.
Yeah.
So how is there 80% of us? So I liked what you said. We're going to get into that. The next follow up, Jerry, is Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your potential reader when you're writing your poem?
That's an interesting question. I think about it all the time. I think about it all the time. Um, I'm not widely read. I'm not particularly well known as a poet, um, but I want to be read.
Yeah,
Um, Somehow, not being all that widely known or published doesn't dissuade me. I get a few poems published in nice magazines a year, and that's fine. But I certainly write to be read.
yeah. So McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth. Shutter, shutter in a camera projector extends our eyelid, and even maybe non-tangible, say religion or philosophy, might extend consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? What humanness?
It extends the tongue.
The tongue. Very good. That's funny because McLuhan says film. People go, what does film extend? They go, your eye or memory. He says it extends your foot because you travel. But this one poet from Italy, you'll love this, Jerry. He goes, what is the pen extend? He goes, my tears.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love
And
that.
it was because my mom taught me that tears, crying releases emotions
Mhm.
and soothes you in a way, but it also gets toxins out of your body.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into poetry. What's the function of poetry?
It's an extension of the soul.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like John Cage. He said he learned from his teacher that music soothes the soul and makes it susceptible for divine intervention.
Yeah. Yeah, I sign on to that for sure. Yeah. Poetry. Of
Well,
course, the purpose of poetry has it shifts through the centuries.
yeah,
That ancient oral poetry that Father Ong writes about, where he, insights that he got from people like Milman Parry and Albert Lord. Um, those ancient poems were about sort of, passing on communal knowledge,
that's it.
a sense of who we are as a people, as a civilization. Um, I don't think that's what poets do now. That's not what John Ashbery um, did. A lot of people find his poetry quite opaque, and it is. That's part of what I love about it. And I sense it does when I read John Ashbery. Well, it does something to me that no other poetry does. I have a hard time articulating it, but I believe in it. I can feel it. And you can, if you press on an Ashbery poem hard enough, you can start to do a close reading. But then there's always the question: how much is this really about the poem? How much of this is really what this kind of poetry is for? I was just talking about all this. I just finished teaching modern and contemporary poetry course, and so I had my students read the book "Self Portrait in a Convex Mirror" by John Ashbery. These are some of the questions that came up, and a lot of the students found him quite fascinating. That there's something going on there. Well, it's sort of like they famously the group of poets that he was part of, that we call the New York School. They hung out with abstract expressionist painters. And arguably what Ashbery is doing with language is cognate with what the abstract expressionists were doing with color. There's something really powerful to it, but I look at an abstract expressionist painting, and I'm not going to say, oh, it means
Right.
this is about the struggle to tame one's soul or something.
That's good because you invoke that. Can you separate the dance from the dancer? Can you separate the poem from the poet? You know, and of course we can, but this goes right to, and then you shifted the word beautifully from what is the function of poetry, and you said what is the purpose of poetry? Because
Mhm.
what your take on Rex Ross said, the purpose of poetry is to woo your lover and subvert the bourgeois.
Appetite la bourgeoisie. Yeah, they shock the bourgeoisie.
It
Well, see, and that's
is,
yeah.
yeah,
So it has multiple functions.
yeah, yeah. But I love because function and purpose are different words, and
Right. Right.
then here's Leo Bersani just died about a year ago, and he did a study of Mallarmé, the symbolist, and I'm always trying to figure out what this means, and maybe you can help me. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Could you say that again?
Yeah. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Well, that the one thing I think about is where my mind goes with that is that um, poetry comes out of struggle.
Yeah.
Like Lowell's bipolar struggles, my bipolar struggles. Um, one can always succumb to those and not emerge capable of doing much of anything or not emerge at all. And yet, out of those kinds of struggles, the poetry comes.
Yeah. It's good because you help me, because most people Yeah, I think everything, all art, but the words are hard. Crises, threatens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Well, if you sit down to write a song, you don't call it a crisis, but it could be that's what's going to make me write the song that I'm trying to write a song.
yeah,
Or
yeah.
I'm
And
going
I
to
don't
try.
want, you know, we're skirting close to, and I don't want to cross into, the old idea that, well, to be an artist you have to suffer.
Yeah.
I think to be human, you're going to suffer. If you're human, you're going to suffer.
Yeah.
Art is one way of transforming that suffering,
Yeah.
just that human suffering, into something.
Yeah. Well, that was again, you have ESP. Uh, your take on Mike Kelly. Art is making your problems other people's problems. I'm
That's
glad you
great.
laughed, Jerry, at that one. Because you laughed at that. Look, at you're more sane than the crazy people because the most people go, well, I think that's a little dark. No,
Yeah, it's dark, but we have darkness in us.
right? But I mean, they don't want to admit it. They don't want to
Yeah.
admit it. It's like Woody Allen's made a huge career making his problem everybody else's problems. You know,
Yeah.
but this poet, I'm not sure, Fanny Howe.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 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 She's a
The
great poet.
the point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't. Now I always you laugh again that I always follow the Mike Kelly with that because
Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of get the Mike Kelly, but the Fanny Howe I don't really get. And most people go, I don't know. But what's your take on that? The point of art is to show people that life is worth living by showing that it isn't.
Here's my take on that.
Yeah,
There's a textbook of poetry called Structure and Surprise,
yeah,
edited by Michael Tooney, Theune. And there are, each chapter is by a different poet. I have a chapter in there, but that's not the one I'm going to refer to. The one I'm going to refer to is by my ex wife, Mary Shebist, Szybist, a great poet, by the way. She won the National Book Award for Poetry in 2013. Um, she has a chapter in there about the concessional structure. The idea is, well, the concessional structure is, okay, I'm going to concede something to you, and then that enables me to articulate something that would not have been as available or as persuasive otherwise. And I wish I had the book right here in front of me, because I would be glad to read this poem. I'm not sure where I have it. I can't
what
remember
is
what the poem is,
Jerry?
but it's a poem that says, okay, let's just say life is meaningless, that none of this matters. And it goes on to catalog all these things that don't matter. Your trip to the Mediterranean, the melon you tasted at lunch, the feel of the breeze coming through the window as you awaken from a nap. Go ahead, and just say, life is meaningless. Life is not worth living.
Yeah,
So I think that's one way I think about it. That yeah, I have to concede that all kinds of things are, as we were talking about earlier, dark,
yeah,
broken, painful in human experience, before I can feel like I even have the right to say anything is worth living.
yeah,
Because otherwise, it's just pap. It's worthless.
yeah. In concede, another word for that. Allow. What's another word you would say?
Concede, allow, um, really, in a sense, agree.
Agree. Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
yes, I agree that human life is a
yeah,
terrible struggle
yeah,
filled with darkness.
Yeah.
but I also believe these other things.
Yeah. Also, it's not the because I have a question that I've dropped for the last 2 or 3 years, but once in a while I throw it back in, and it's why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless? Now, I have to usually couch it. I go, I'm not saying life is pointless. I'm
Hmm.
saying that why is it so hard for humans to consider that? And I used to do these interviews in coffee houses, like in front of 40 or 50 people. And the person I was interviewing looked around and was all his friends, and he goes, everybody in this room knows life is pointless. I mean, even literally said it. Most people go because it's not pointless. Because then you're just surrendering. Well, life is pointless, and then you're surrendering. It's a little contradictory. But how would you answer that in saying what you just said? Why is it so difficult for humans to consider the possibility that life may be pointless?
Yeah. Well, I think I connected back to the reference you made earlier to Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
that people want meaning. I want to believe that my life is
Yeah.
meaningful. And if I believe my life is pointless, I don't know that I'm going to encounter much meaning there.
So you think we're hardwired to find meaning?
I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
I do.
it's probably in us. That's what
Yeah.
thinking is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I dropped that question too. Is thinking after I ask is whatever is uh, you know more innate or more invented? I sometimes ask, is thinking more innate or more invented? You know,
Mhm.
it's like, yeah, most people say, well, it's innate, so I don't even ask it. But you brought up that word struggle, and I'm really curious because this is, Viola Spolin. She was a social worker in Chicago, and she did role playing exercises and kind of invented comedy improv. She spawned Second City and
Really?
yeah, oh no, she's amazing, and she got it. Oh well, basically, comedy improv comes from Viola Spolin and Martin Buber.
Martin Buber.
Can
Really?
you believe that?
I
They kind of blended those two and invented, groundlings and all the comedy improv. But
mhm.
here's my question in my quote by her to set this up, because you brought up that word struggle. She said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it.
Yeah.
So, what role does struggle play in your creative process?
I think it's got a lot of different manifestations. I mean, often what I'm writing about is struggle, whether it's mine or my struggle transformed into somebody else's, a character. Um, yeah, because I write sometimes I write very autobiographical poems. Other times, I'll just, even if I'm saying it's just a character, it's not
Yeah.
me. But I don't think I'd have a connection to that character if I didn't share some of their struggles. Um, but it's always a struggle, I think, to get the language onto the page, even in rough form.
Yeah.
Um, and so, sometimes maybe a line will just come to me, but that's a line. I've got to move with that. Got to get
Yeah.
more. And then multiple drafts. That's always a struggle. And I have people I send poems to help me in that struggle, and then I comment on their poems. I think we always need a community, a creative
Yeah.
community of some kind.
Yeah, that term rewrite, revise, it comes up a lot with writers. Amazing. Because here's the other one. This is Leonard Cohen. The only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play in your creative process?
Well, the vulnerability of revealing things about myself is always there as I think a kind of risk. And I think we reveal things. Again, I think even Ashbery, again, who writes this very opaque kind of poetry. I mean, he's still got himself in there.
Yeah.
There's still vulnerability. That vulnerability has to be there. But I what I'm thinking right now too, as I go back to um, Mr. Kurtz's, "There's nothing I detest more than the stench of a lie."
Yeah.
If I'm really writing what I believe, if I'm writing from that space of honesty, I may not be writing what people want to hear.
Yeah. And see, that's what is, but vulnerability and empathy are the two words that come up in all my interviews eventually. And even if they're not spoken,
Yeah,
I'm always trying, what is vulnerability and what is empathy? And is that the human condition? And should we wallow in it or should we embrace it or whatever? But what does courage mean to you now?
yeah, I think it means to staying in that space of honesty, about my own vulnerabilities, my own weaknesses, my own limitations. Um, I'm more comfortable than I used to be of talking about how insecure I am. Um, I'm always afraid of sounding stupid and things like that. And there's risk, there's vulnerability in that, I'd rather stay in that space than pretend otherwise. And to me, that's a kind of courage.
That's a courage. You know what the most watched TED Talk is? Fake it to make it. And I'm all for, I mean, it's like, McLuhan has that great line, the fact and fake come from, or, fat or whatever. They both come from the same root, to
Yeah, I think
make,
auturade, meaning to make.
to make. So
Yeah.
you're, but here's Marcel Proust. On what occasion do you lie? Dude, you laugh. I gotta tell you, as serious and real and grounded this interview's been, and I really appreciate it, Jerry. I know if you laugh, it makes me feel like I'm somewhat successful because
Yeah.
I'm here to have a good time. But these are like you go, that's a difficult, that's a deep question, and then you'll laugh at something that really makes me feel good because I think we have to approach this with some sort of sense of humor, but it's sort of like what Zappa said. I'm very serious about being not serious.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Now
yeah.
that sounds like a cop out in a way, though. With you, it seems like, hey, I'm gonna lay my cards on the table.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
it seems like. You're just like, boom, I'm here. So I really appreciate that. But how would you respond to that? Because it's on the last page of every Vanity Fair. They ask some celebrity, on what occasion do you lie?
Um, when say somebody gives a reading and it's not very good, I'm not going to tell them it's not good. I'm
Yeah,
going to say, "Oh, great job,
yeah,
great job."
yeah. Okay, here's Shelby Foote. I'm curious your reaction. A fact is not a truth until you love it.
Yeah, facts we can just accumulate. Like papers piled on a table. A truth, I think, is something that we live from. The truth that, well, like you said earlier, I can't remember who you were quoting, that the poem is a spiritual act. And I'm paraphrasing that. That's
Yeah.
not the exact phrasing, but That's a truth. That's not a fact. You know,
Yeah.
the fact is the idea of order at Key West was written by Wallace Stevens. If
Yeah.
there's a truth to be had there, it's that, there's something sustaining to my soul in that poem.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I didn't say the Gary Snyder, but I really love this one. Gary Snyder, my task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then putting that seeing into language. So, our eyes can deceive us, what
Mhm.
we see. And so here's Louis Buñuel. I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it.
Well, um, certainly if they claim to have found the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Yeah, another sensibility, another way of negotiating the world that I got from Father Ong is um, well, I remember somebody brought up in class, the idea that, well, what was true then, isn't true anymore. Now we have a different truth, um, and at one point he said, "Yeah, and forget that idea that you can never know the truth. That's high school stuff. If it was true," and he said, "if it was true, you wouldn't be able to know it." Uh, but he also had complicated ideas about what truth is. He would say every statement conceals at least as much as it reveals, meaning that any statement, no matter how true, has to be supplemented by further statements. Um, we know more than we can say, and any utterance means more than we know at that given moment. It's what he referred to as relationism or relationalism, not relative, to distinguish it from relativism. Um, we can really know truth, but we can never know the whole truth.
Yeah. It's funny because I wanted to go back on what occasion do you lie? Tom Waits said, I didn't know I needed an occasion. And this woman who dresses stars, she goes, that's on what occasion do you lie? She goes, that's called manners.
Well, yeah, see, that's the thing, Hey, it's good to see you. Well, it may not be, but, you know, and I don't know, maybe we need another term for that, different from lying, but I'm
Yeah.
comfortable with calling it lying. But,
Yeah.
things that are just expected and polite to do. Like after the reading, saying that was a great reading. Well, that's polite.
Yeah.
If that person comes to me and in confidence says, could you help me improve my reading style? Well, then I could, then I would have some specific things to say.
Yeah. Yeah. This is fun because Louis quote, I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it. 95% of people go, oh, yeah, that's great. I believe that. And one guy finally goes, that's bullshit. Because if I'm going to seek something, it's because I want to find it.
Yeah,
And you,
there seems to
yeah,
be something a little disingenuous about, I believe in seeking the truth, but I part ways when somebody says they found it. Well, I mean, and again, my take on that is, well, if somebody says, they've got a lock on the truth, okay, generally, I find that person spooky.
exactly. And
But if
yeah,
somebody says, I've made a discovery, E equals MC squared, I think it's valid. Well, I want to know about that and take that seriously.
well, it's both Buñuel and Zappa are my heroes, and they're both, you know, like like dissing their whole thing is dissing their church.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's their meat and potatoes, and they really need that. That
yeah,
is who
yeah,
they are, or they kind of don't deny it. So he's a he's deep satirist like Zappa. Buñuel's satire, but you say it and sometimes I shouldn't say who said these, because then it clouds it. But you
Yeah.
say it, and they don't hear Louis Buñuel as much as they go, "I'm for anyone who seeks truth," but and then one guy goes, "That's bullshit," because if I'm going to seek something, I'm going to find it. So then I morphed it into the cliche goes, the journey's more important than the destination. Well, why do we have to name or seek a destination if the journey's more important?
Yeah. Maybe it's the destination. We need a destination to motivate a journey.
And then I just go, well, you ever hear of Flaneur's psychogeography? The people who sat in Paris in the 20s and changed the world, and all they did was sit at a coffee house and slack, and didn't do anything and get to the point where what Joyce said is find epiphanies in everydayness.
Yeah. Well, the coffee shop is the destination, but it's always temporary.
Yeah.
The epiphany is the destination, but it's always temporary.
Yeah.
Even in the great epiphany in the gospel, where Jesus is transfigured before Peter, James, and John. And I think it's Peter who says, Lord, it's good for us to be here. Let us construct booths so that we can remain here. And he says, no, we got to go back down off the mountain. We got to keep moving.
Keep moving.
I think I like that story because I think it's psychologically very revealing. Certainly, it reveals something about my psyche. That is, I have a real tendency to want to find something good and then clamp down on it.
Yeah.
And just say, I'm going to stay here. This is good. This is safe. But it's not what's most, it's not what's richest. It's not what's most needed. I can get inspiration from that moment, but I have to keep moving.
Yeah. We all know. I mean, everybody knows that they want safety. They want the home, the warmth, the home. They want the womb. Like Robin Williams says, womb service. Like, we want that, but then it's like, no, once you get that, it's like, well, it's all over with. You got to find some other,
Yeah. Well, and I think in some sense everybody does know that, but I think it's dangerous when people start to convince themselves otherwise.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, I asked for 90 minutes. We only got through not even a third of the questions. So I hope you'd agree to do a part 2 somewhere down the line, maybe 3, 4, 5 months.
I'd be happy to. Sure,
Okay, yeah,
to.
but can you go a few more minutes now?
Oh yeah, I'm fine. I'm
okay, good.
However long you want to go.
I want to do a little more on this truth thing. And here's Eartha Kitt. Truth is a theory that is constantly being disproved. Only lies, it seems, go on forever.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot packed in there because I think it's the key word is only lies, it seems, goes on forever.
Yeah.
But truth is a theory that is constantly. Any thoughts on Eartha Kitt's line?
Well, first of all, I didn't know Eartha Kitt had that part of her. I know her as what I think the second Catwoman in the old Batman show. Could you say it again?
Yeah. Truth is a theory that is constantly being disproved. Only lies, it seems, go on forever.
Well, that makes me think of the Father Ong adage that I alluded to earlier, that every statement conceals at least as much as it reveals and has to be supplemented by further statements. So no matter how true that is, I have to stay on the move. I keep having to ask further questions, and sometimes they're questions that only emerge after the previous statement has been made.
Yeah.
So that truth is about ongoing process.
Yeah.
And I like that idea that therefore the lie is something that has stopped. It's the formulation that keeps getting sort of mindlessly repeated. The election was stolen.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's that garble thing. If you say a lie enough, people will, you just keep repeating the lie.
Yeah.
But that's Schopenhauer's the next one. All truth passes through three stages. First, it's ridiculed. Secondly, it's violently opposed. And thirdly, it's accepted as being self-evident. I knew it all along.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I invoked Einstein earlier, his theory of relativity that
Yeah.
you know, and it seems like almost everybody in the culture has at least some vague idea of what relativity is now, and that of course that's true. And
Yes.
I think a vague idea is about all I have. I certainly couldn't work it out mathematically.
Well, you hit pay dirt on one of my other. I'm always trying to figure out. People say vulnerability, empathy, but the other word is vaguely. I asked this guy once. I says, "Are you a filmmaker? Are you studying to be a filmmaker?" And he goes, "Vaguely." And I goes, "That's the kind of filmmaker I want to work with." Vaguely. And here's Robert Evans. There's three sides to every story: my side, your side, and the truth, and no one is lying.
That I've thought about that quite a bit. That particular adage. Um, of course, there's something to it. It can be used, I think, in a dangerous way, in the sense that, well, there's one person's version of the truth, my person's version of the truth. The implication could be taken to be that the truth, as it really is, lies somewhere halfway in between the two.
Yeah.
And see, and I'm going to say that, for example, um, you know, Hitler's idea about what Germany needed to look like was flat wrong. It was not. It's not something that merits a sort of halfway. That so that there are people who opposed Hitler, and then there was Hitler, and the truth was really halfway between the two. Well, no, I don't think it was. I don't think he had his fingers on much truth there.
Yeah.
Now that's not inevitably what that adage you just quoted means, but it can easily be taken that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's in the movie business, in what he went through. The follow-up line I never read is, memories shared serve each one differently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We all construct our own narrative out
Yeah.
of those common memories.
What, two more and we'll close out for part one. Really amazing time with you. I want to tell you this Don Marquis one and get your reaction. If you make people think they're thinking, they'll love you. If you really make them think, they'll hate you.
Yeah. Again, I think of a former president of ours. Um, yeah. And again, I have personal experience with this, and this, when I've sort of succumbed to certain kinds of groupthink, usually during, or maybe always during, some kind of mental breakdown. It's comforting to think that, well, I am this part of a group that is enlightened, and all I have to do is follow the consensus of what this group says, what this group knows,
Yeah.
and then I'm okay, and I'm not really thinking.
Yeah.
It's like my I have a spiritual director I talk to every month or two, and and I'll bring up some of the things that I'm thinking about that maybe I disagree with. I won't say the church, because the church is everybody, the hierarchy. And he might give me some feedback, but he'll say, you've got to decide yourself. It doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what you think.
No.
And, and especially when I was still in a more vulnerable state in the time of my mental breakdown, I really just wanted his reassurance. Oh, it's okay for you to think this way.
Yeah.
And he recognized that.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, he was never caustic or mean about it. He was just, in a sense, he was saying, no, I want you to be human. I
Yeah.
want you to think about this.
Yeah. I met a marriage counselor at a party one day and I just said, so what do you do? She goes, well, basically, I sit there and listen to them talk. He did that. She did that, blah, 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 blah. And I don't say anything unless they go, well, what should we do? If they don't ask me, I'm just the listening. I'm just sort of,
Yeah.
assuring listener.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll interject this one on Trump and then we'll go for the last one. If
Okay.
Trump gets thrown in jail and cannot run for president, writes a book, says he's sorry, he did wrong, would you forgive him?
My first thought is yes. My second thought is, what do you mean by forgive?
Yeah. It's good.
Um, yeah, I just, forgiveness is something I continue to struggle with
Yeah.
because forgiveness cannot mean opening myself to further abuse. Like, if a battered spouse
Yeah.
is to forgive their battering partner, that does not mean opening themselves to further abuse. So it can't be that.
Yeah.
Whatever it means, it can't mean that. But the idea of what forgiveness means, I think that's something that maybe as a culture we still need to talk about more.
Oh, totally. And
I'm not sure what, because I'm not, I'm 63 years old. I'm still not entirely sure what it means, other
yeah,
than one thing that I've thought. Um, Forgiveness means that in some sense I remain open to you,
yeah,
that I haven't written you off, that I'm willing to talk.
yeah. It's hard and well articulated, very hard to do. In 90, almost 99% when I ask that Trump question goes, no, because I wouldn't believe him. And it's really hard for me to hear when people say yes. And it's like, wow, I want to hear, I ask all these questions because I want to hear the answer I want to hear. But I
Yeah,
don't say that. I'm just open, but it's a way to
yeah,
reassure me. And am I thinking okay? Or, I know we're wide
mhm,
open. I'm like, learn from McLuhan. Pascal says, if you want to know about anything, you got to know this end of the spectrum and that end and everything in
yeah,
between. Comprehensivist.
yeah. And it's difficult to say yes to a question like that.
It's difficult. What are you, a tropic? It's Mark Twain, I think, nailed it. He said, forgiveness is the smell the flower releases when the foot steps on it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And saying that if I would forgive him, that doesn't mean saying that I would vote for him. It
Yeah,
doesn't mean saying that he should not be banned from public office.
yeah,
I don't think forgiveness precludes those things.
yeah,
But that's why I also raised the question of, well, what is forgiveness? I
yeah,
don't really know.
yeah. So we'll close out part one, Jerry. Again, amazing time. I really appreciate it.
Me
So,
too. I've loved this conversation, Jerry.
so solid. This is an experimental filmmaker, Hollis Frampton. Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. So he's kind of explaining why did we invent narrative and storytelling? Most people go, that's hardwired, but whatever. My question is, can you forget to die?
Well, I definitely think that we can delude ourselves and distract ourselves. Um, in such a way that we block out any knowledge of death. And I think there's something very psychologically damaging about that. I can't really connect the dots, but my deep intuition is that that's very psychologically damaging. Um, and which is why I think that good art has darkness in it.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's not just darkness. It doesn't just give in to darkness, but it's got the darkness of death in it.
Yeah.
It's got the whiff of death in it because that's always part of what we know about ourselves.
Yeah. But it's also, Jerry, the thing about that question is when I go, can you forget to die? People don't know if I'm asking them to be literal or metaphoric. So most people go, no, you can't forget to die. But some people go, yes, I forgot to die. And that's why I'm free. I'm going to live life to its fullest because I'm not, so
Yeah,
go ahead.
and see again, I don't know that I'm living life to the fullest unless I'm facing into death.
That's part of it because you can't
This is,
deny. Yeah.
yeah, this is part of why authenticity for Heidegger meant being toward death.
Being what?
Being toward death.
Death. Yeah.
It's hyphenated. I don't know what it is, but it's one of those,
Yeah.
German word. Maybe it's his coinage, one of those German words that is strung together.
Being toward death, meaning that is, we know there's an end point.
Yeah, a consciousness
Yeah.
of that limitation. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Jerry, thank you so much. Wow, super enlightening. And really, I just can't wait to tell Dylan what you said. That
Oh
was
yeah, I
so
would.
touching.
What's that?
That was so touching because it so resonates with me. His wife was the main woman in our marriage. His wife's amazing too, and he's just a super special guy. And but the beauty is you just had that chink, one little touch. It's like I wish you could have been in these car rides with me for 5
Oh
hours.
man, I would have loved to have been there. When were you married, by the way?
We were married 2001, a marriage oddity.
Okay. Because
2000.
I don't know if it was the same person, but Dylan was married back when I met him. This would have been probably around 1977, 1978. I don't know if he's married to the same person, but I met her too.
Yeah.
Whoever that, I think she was a fiddle player.
Martha's not a fiddle player. Martha's like a Faulkner, intellectual, beautiful, intelligent woman, and they're a really lovely couple, and they mean a lot to us and
Yeah.
to me and my wife. And Dylan is just like, whew. I'll tell you more, but
Yeah, we can do that. We can do it.
There are about 4 podcasts I have with Dylan.
Oh, I didn't know you had others.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll have to look for them.
Yeah. There's 2 channels I have. Concerned Edison just had a few when the pandemic started. And then most of them are on, I'm probably wrong about everything, this channel. And you can just hit live and there's millions and I know several of the Dylans are on this channel that we're on.
Okay. Well, I just found the one, so I'll have to look up the others.
Yeah. But you are special, Jerry. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Even though I'm going to hit this end broadcast button now, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Same here, Jerry.
Super cool. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.